Hi, this is Colin, and this is going to be our weekly nose cultural roundtable, except we usually do it on Fridays. We're doing it on Wednesday because of the holiday, and we're going to begin by talking about Bono. I was just listening to Bono talk to David Remnick in one of those live in front of an audience interviews that the New Yorker now does a lot, which is interesting because the other thing we're talking about is Tar, the movie Tar, which stars Cate Blanchett as a conductor. And that movie begins with her doing exactly the same thing, but with Adam Gopnik. So, and I think there are a lot of other through lines, too, between these two things. These are about the difficulty of becoming and being and staying in place as a top-rank musician. However, each of these people handle it in very different ways. That is Surrender by U2. Surrender is also the title of a new book by Bono, kind of a memoir in 40 songs. And Bono is kind of everywhere. First of all, welcome to the nose. I should say that part first. And I was actually lobbying for an entire Bono show. Even though, honestly, although I admire Bono, my life would basically be the same if there had not been a Bono. And there are a lot of people, including some people one person on the show today, who could not say that. But there's like the Bono-ness of Bono, or what David Brooks calls the too muchness of Bono. And even though he's kind of perfect in a lot of ways, I mean, this is a man who's been married to the same woman for 40 years and kept his band together for 40 years, or they have kept themselves together for 40 years. But there's something like he's sort of a target, too, just a humorous target. It's okay to make fun of Bono. I'm just interested in all those things, and so I thought we'd get a panel together. We talk about that. We'll also talk about the movie Tar, about another complicated musician, but maybe not complicated in such a pleasant and engaging way as Bono generally is. And that is Lydia Tár, the conductor, not a real person, played by Cate Blanchett, who is a real person, and who did just all the music stuff kind of amazingly for this movie. So that is to come, our discussion of Tar. Right now, we're going to talk about Bono. Bono is out there right now, and because of it, yes, he's talking to David Marchese in the every time I pick up a magazine, David Marchese, New York Times, talking to Bono. David Brooke, Atlantic Magazine, talking to Bono. David Remnick on stage talking to Bono. They're all talking to Bono. Let's hear let's get the panel going on this, I think. And we'll play the clips as we go along here. So, Irene, I heard you chuckle or something. So that means you have to go first. So I kind of want to start with where everybody was on Bono. And Irene, I should also say who's on the panel today. I seem very disorganized. It's it's that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and you go in and there's like 4 cars in the parking lot, and you think, oh, well, we're doing our show anyway. Sam Hadelman is with us, works in music public relations, hosts the Sam Hadelman Show at Radio Free Brooklyn. Irene Papoulis teaches writing at Trinity College. Bill Yousman is professor of media studies at Sacred Heart University. So, Irene, you've been on the nose as long as any human being has been on the nose. You were on the first nose ever. And one of the things that I enjoy particularly about having you on the nose is I think you go through more changes with a lot of things that we look at and talk about from where you are at the beginning of the process to where you are at the end. I mean, that's a very typical Papoulian thing to do, to start out in one place and wind up in another after 3 or 4 days of immersion. And my sense is that this happened to a certain degree with Bono. So tell us where you were at the beginning of this process.
Okay. So where I was is, I was listening to a lot of music in the 80s. So U2 was part of the atmosphere for me. It wasn't a band that I especially loved or bought a lot of records of. I always danced when New Year's Day came on or Sunday Bloody Sunday, but a lot of their songs didn't really get me off the dance floor at all. But I knew it was an Irish band. And then I kind of knew something. I knew he did something with AIDS, and that that he was a little bit, he was a little maybe too close to Bush about that or something like that. But that's about all I knew. That was my starting point.
All right. So, you're sort of neutral on Bono. Okay, let's talk to Bill Yousman, who is not neutral on Bono. So, Bill, you started this process. You probably changed not at all during this process, is what I would be guessing.
I might have changed a little bit about my feelings about the public figure / activist Bono, but not about Bono the musician. I'm the aforementioned person that you said, my life would not be the same without Bono. But I should be kind of more specific, and for one thing, my life would not be the same without music. And music has been really a crucial touch point throughout my life, something that's sustained me through bad times and made good times even better. And it's hard I always struggle with identifying like a favorite band, because my tastes are very eclectic and they're all over the place, and there's so many. And, I think you even have to drill down into genre if I was to talk about favorites. But if we talk about rock music, U2 is definitely in like my top tier of bands, which have been really important to me throughout my life, because they emerged at just that right time, when I was late teens, early 20s, and their music has always just really, really spoken to me. So I wouldn't necessarily say Bono specifically, but Bono as the front person and, one of the key writers of this group, U2. But they really are a collective, and that's one of the things that makes them so great for me in my pantheon.
Actually, I was listening to Remnick interview Bono, and he brought up the fact, he said, and unusually for a band, you guys split the money 4 ways evenly. And Bono goes, what a fool I was. I mean, he didn't really mean that. And then he said afterwards.
But they are.
Yeah.
It is all 4 of them.
Yeah.
And that band would not be what it is if you took any of those pieces away.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go to Sam Hadelman, young Sam Hadelman. And so for you, you really hadn't gotten on an on-ramp towards Bono or U2 prior to doing all this. And we should say Sam is immersed in music as anybody could possibly be, but just not this, right?
Yeah, I don't really like 80s rock. It's probably my least favorite genre of all time. I know.
Samuel.
I was grungy. I was like an angsty teen. I wore like Led Zeppelin jackets. I had like long hair, jeans that touched the floor. Like I was real angsty as a youth. I had never heard a U2 song before this week. The only time I'd ever heard Bono sing was like renditions of We Are the World. That was the only time I've ever heard Bono sing in my life. I think it's like, I honestly think it was when they put that album on everyone's phone that my entire generation deaded them. Like everybody I knew was so annoyed. Like I can remember that day in high school, like it was yesterday. Everybody was like, "Who's U2? Why is this on my phone?" And like obviously he had been spoofed in South Park episodes. I knew a lot about his activism and the fact that he's one of those people that only has one name. But yeah, that's about it. It's like, and as Colin alluded to, I don't want it to make it seem like I'm not a person who doesn't like old music. I'm wearing a Pavement hat, and I spent the weekend looking for Stylistics records. Like I'm secretly 65 years old. It just, U2 is probably the biggest hole in my music knowledge. Like I said, I've never heard a song in my life.
Right. Jonathan McPants and I had the same reaction to the idea that Pavement would be old music.
Yeah.
But we'll leave that where it is. So, there's a way in which, well, first of all, let's hear a little something from the book itself. The book is kind of turning into a big deal. I believe it's number 2 on the New York Times hardcover bestseller list. Here's something. This is from the animation from the audiobook version of Surrender. This is A1, Gene.
I'm jumping around the living room of 10 Cedarwood Road to the sound of Glad to See You Go from the Ramones Leave Home. You gotta go, 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 goodbye. Glad to see you go, 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 goodbye. It's 1978, the day of my 18th birthday. These songs are so simple, and yet they express a complexity that's way more relevant to my life than Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, which I've just finished, which took me 3.5 weeks to read. This album takes only 29 minutes and 57 seconds. Songs so simple that even I can play them on guitar, and I can't play guitar. Songs so simple, even I might be able to write one. This would be some kind of personal revolution, the reverberations of which might be felt all the way upstairs to the empty room of my older brother Norman. Or more importantly still, down the hallway to the kitchen, where the dad's sitting. My dad, who wants to talk to me about getting a job. A job.
All right, so I should correct one thing that I said. I said that my life wouldn't really be all that different without U2. The one exception is after 9/11, in which I was devastated and soul sick and just miserable. I mean, I think I was unusual. I mean, nobody was feeling great, obviously, but everybody was just devastated. I was extra devastated somehow, and nothing really sounded right either. It was hard to find culture that was capable of providing any kind of solace, except U2 about a year before this had recorded an album called All That You Leave Behind, and it was like they made an album about 9/11 before it happened. It was unbelievable. It sort of had everything in it about 9/11. It was that ability that artists have to see around corners sometimes better than anybody else can, and it's like they sensed it somehow, sensed something like that was going to happen. But Irene, you know, I also said in an email that many wonderful musicians are not necessarily that interesting to talk to, you know, and sometimes it's really, you can wreck your enjoyment or diminish your enjoyment by trying to talk to them because they've already said everything they're going to say. Miles Davis doesn't have another thing to say to you that he hasn't already said with his trumpet. You know, Bono seems to be an exception to this. He really is a skilled raconteur. I've listened to him do a stunning, affectionate impersonation of Paul McCartney that's like right on the nose. He has all kinds of topics he can draw on. I mean, I think it's getting to know him a little bit better or being reminded of him a little bit better as we prepared for this. I was struck by, wow, this is just really an interesting guy. I'm not quite sure why I've been making fun of him for 10 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I saw when I got the New Yorker that the excerpt from his memoir was in a few months ago. I thought, yeah, whatever. I don't really, you know, he's talking about his life. It doesn't seem that interesting. So I'm so glad that I read it now for this nose, because I think he is a wonderful storyteller and writer and interesting, and he can kind of make fun of himself in an interesting way, or just be kind of reflective in a way that you wouldn't expect from. I wouldn't have expected from him. So yeah, it absolutely made me want to read the rest of the book, which I think I'm going to do.
Right. The book. I should say the book was in my house for weeks because my son-in-law is a big U2 fan, and so we got it for him. But I haven't cracked it because I didn't want to break the binding or anything. But I'm sort of feeling the same way. Like maybe I need to go through this book. And you know, Bill, the activism. I don't know. Near showtime, I was passing around this clip of Bono. And I think the rest of you too, kind of fake busking, but in a subway in Kyiv, and in a war zone. And there's sort of a way in which, you know, there's the activism of doing We Are the World, to Sam's point, which is fine. But then everybody just goes off and does their stuff afterwards. I get the feeling this is just such an enduring full-time job. Yeah, he does want to know the people in the White House who make decisions. He wants access to those people. He's as serious about that as he is about his music, apparently. You would probably have a better grasp of that, though.
Well, you know, I'm thinking I'm a big fan of a political sports writer, Dave Zirin. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Dave Zirin talks about how activist athletes are also told to just shut up and dribble and, you know, stay in their lane. And I think that's one of the things that maybe some people, not me, find annoying or offensive about Bono is that he won't stay in his lane. He's got lots and lots of interests, and he insists on putting himself forward into them. Now, that does reflect, you know, a certain type of egotism. Some people would say a certain type of white male privilege, wealthy, of course, now very, very wealthy white male privilege. Except See, in some of those other excerpts that we read and listened to, I think it really comes out that he's a romantic. And romantics are like really easy to make fun of because they can be very naive about pragmatic political affairs. And he's insisted on throwing himself into these things. But I agree that I think this is organic to him. I think this is real. I think he's sincere. I don't think he's an opportunist like some are. But I also see how it can all come off very sort of white saviory when he gets involved in Africa, and he's gotten a lot of criticism for, not really understanding what he's been getting himself involved into and putting his voice forward instead of the voice of African people. I think those are legitimate criticisms, but at the same time, I think that if things can be accomplished, I want those things to be accomplished regardless of who is it that is accomplishing them. And I do think that there are some things that he's done. He has brought some aid, and it's easier to mock and criticize than it is to actually do the work. And even though I disagree with him about a lot of things, and certainly he has bellied up to some people who I find really, really horrible and despicable in order to get these things done, I don't think you can argue that it's not sincere and that he hasn't actually accomplished some things.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead, Irene.
I was going to say that, there's it just makes me think about irony and how we used to look at him, that one has the impulse to look at him with very ironic, he doesn't understand why billionaires should pay. It's one of the things he said, I love globalization. I love corporations because that's the answer. And, he doesn't think that maybe that billionaires should pay high taxes. And I said, oh my gosh, how can he say that? You know, and the answer he doesn't have the exact same politics as I do or you do, but at the same time, what is the alternative? Is the alternative just be rich and enjoy your money and forget about the world? And it makes me think about earnestness, because it seems like now we're kind of, I might say, I've just been thinking that we're entering an age of earnestness where we value earnestness more than we did because it went so far. We went so far away from believing in earnestness, being just honest. We always think, he seems earnest, but it's really just the facade of an image and who he's supposed to be. But what if he really is, as you're saying, what if he really is earnest? And if he is, that's fantastic. And we need more people to be earnest also and just say, hey, there's some things I could do to change things. I can go to Africa and fight AIDS, he says, because I've got the money and other issues. That's earnest. If that's earnest, then it's a wonderful and amazingly fantastic thing.
Well, Irene, the other thing that he talks about, which is for the most part still pretty unfashionable in the world of the arts these days, is his spirituality. I wouldn't say it's unfashionable, but he really, that's a big dimension for him. And he brings it up over and over and over again. It's one of the things that the album that I mentioned, but I think I said it the wrong way, All the Things That You Can't Leave Behind, has so much in. The last song is Grace. And to me, that's interesting too, because he's never more than a few paragraphs away in the course of an interview from bringing that up again. And I don't know, maybe that's part of the earnestness.
It's the ultimate earnestness, I think, in a way, to have spiritual belief, you have to be earnest, right? I mean, or it moves you away from irony or an ironic, eye-rolling attitude about the world. And I love the way, even in the early section, the part that was in the New Yorker from his book, the excerpt, talked about his background with Catholicism and Protestantism, both, because one parent was each of those. And it's really interesting to think about the seeds of that.
Right. And that was a mixed marriage of that sort when it was really fraught. I mean, this was a time of civil war and I mean, to do that was really kind of very, dire in a lot of ways. So, Sam, I'm sort of wondering, whether any of your thoughts and tastes vis-a-vis Bono have evolved over the course of the last few days.
Yeah, I think that they have. First off, the thing I want to touch on what you said at the beginning, that he's kept his marriage intact, kept his band intact, kept his net worth intact. Like the fact that he's been able to pull this off. I think I read a stat that he's the only, like U2's the only band to have a #1 album in 4 decades in a row. That's incredible. Like, and as someone who like obviously works in music, like pulling that achievement off, 22 Grammys, does a bunch of stuff with foundations, even though I'm always a little about billionaires and activism because of the whole capitalism thing. But I think that, and especially like learning about how the band was formed, hearing him talk, like I do like his interviews. That's like honestly what I did the most deep diving on. I don't think he's like the most spectacular interviewee on planet Earth, but I really like the background he gives about the band, especially about his spirituality. I think it was on CBS where he talked and he said that I could go into a church, I can go into a synagogue. I don't know. I feel like at first it was a guy I might avoid if I see him at a party, and now after a week, I might go grab a pint with him. I think that's and also the music's good. Like U2's music. This is a real hot take. Those U2 guys aren't bad. I definitely listened to some of the music, and I was like, okay, maybe I was a little down on the 80s for no good reason. Maybe I can dance a little bit. Maybe I could have some fun.
Right.
They might be able to do a little bit with this rock and roll thing.
Well, actually, the band has a story about how, as very young men, they were about to kind of break out, and because of this religious instruction that they were getting in school, the 3 of them decided that it really wasn't what God wanted. And they went to this rather posh manager they had, and they explained the whole thing to him. And he said, and Bono also does a great impersonation of him, but he says, so God is telling you that you need to break up the band. And they go, well, yeah, that's what God's telling us. And he says, what does God know about contracts? Because I've just signed a rather lucrative one on your behalf. And they went, oh, well, maybe we misunderstood. Maybe we misunderstood what God was trying to say. But yeah, this is like a struggle all the way through. Sam, and I think the other thing is, although, Irene may have been out there on the dance floor dancing to Sunday Bloody Sunday, which is a pretty weird song to be dancing to if you think about it. But there's kind of a way in which, yeah, they've had #1 albums in 4 decades, but they're not like, I don't know. You don't just default into U2 the way maybe you would default into the Beatles or Stevie Wonder. There's some bands that because of the just universality and bands and artists because of the universality of their popularity and their voice and stuff, but it's not even a choice you make. But Sam, I sort of feel like U2 is a choice. You really have to decide. Maybe I'm just because I'm the wrong age for all of this. No,
that you're exactly right. I think that and also I think it's just because there's such an overwhelming amount of music. Like you have to remember, the Beatles only operated for 9 years. Zeppelin only really had a couple of years. The Who really only had a couple of years. It's easy to romanticize a few albums. We're talking about like 22 albums, a live album, a column in the New York Times, a book, foundation. There's so much to tackle there. And I don't think that their sound really carried into the 90s and especially into today, and especially because, rock's kind of dead. It's not like something that I'm going to go to the mall and see someone in a U2 shirt and be like, oh, I got to listen to them. It's not like they're not as passe as other bands are. But I think it's something you just got to kind of buy into, kind of like a Pearl Jam or something like that.
Okay, so we're going to stop there. We're going to end. So, Gene, we're going to end instead of what we've got. We've got a clip here from Bono as part of his never-ending book tour, which actually is going to end, I think, on Monday, appearing on November 3rd on the Stephen Colbert Show. So this is Bono talking to Stephen Colbert, and I assume also singing. Actually, I haven't listened to this clip. I think that bit is evident. But anyway, Gene, we'll end with A2.
It wasn't 2 years into our marriage, and I could see my wife, my young wife, in prolonged moments returning to the vast silence she holds inside herself. She was suggesting that even when I was home, I wasn't home. Our weekly walks along the promenade could be tinged with melancholy. There is anyway a kind of off-color romance to a deserted seaside town in the winter. Your heart's opera scored by the sound of the tide crashing over a stony beach, shushing everything as the waves try to make up their mind
whether they're leaving or staying, leaving or staying, leaving or staying, white waves kissing black stones, shushing all around.
That's a bit of the Mahler Fifth. The Mahler Fifth is one of the pivot points of the movie Tár. Tár, which stars Cate Blanchett and which won big prizes at the Venice Film Festival and has created quite a critical stir since then. Tár tells the story of the conductor, Lydia Tár, one of the people operating in the frosting of the cake that is serious music, in the sense that there's a small part of the world of classical or symphonic music where there's a lot of money and resources and prestige, and you're lucky if you can get all the way up there, and then you're flying around in private jets. So that's who she is. She's working at that level. She's doing a lot of different things, but conducting in Berlin in particular, and her life begins falling apart largely because of things that she herself has done, but maybe not entirely because of things that she herself has done. Before we get to the panel, before we hear what they have to say, let's hear a little bit from the movie. This is kind of a longish clip, but this takes place, I believe, at Juilliard. I think this is where this is happening. You hear Blanchett as Lydia Tár and Zethvan Smith-Neist as Max. Max is a young student, and they're getting into a conversation about music and identity.
Max, why not a Kyrie? Like something like Bach's Mass in B minor.
I'm not really into Bach.
You're not into Bach? Mm. Oh, Max. Have you ever played or conducted Bach?
Honestly, as a BIPOC, pangender person, I would say Bach's misogynistic life makes it kind of impossible for me to take his music seriously.
What do you mean by that?
Well, didn't he sire like 20 kids?
Yes, that's documented, along with a considerable amount of music. But I'm sorry, I'm unclear as to what his prodigious skills in the marital bed have to do with B minor.
Nowadays, white male cis composers, just not my thing.
The problem with enrolling yourself as an ultrasonic epistemic dissident is that if Bach's talent can be reduced to his gender, birth country, religion, sexuality, and so on, then so can yours. All right, everyone. Using Max's criteria, let's consider Max's thing. In this case, Anna Thorvaldsdottir. Now, can we agree on two pieces of observation? One, that Anna was born in Iceland, and two, that she is, in a Waldorf teacher kind of way, a super hot young woman. Show of hands. All right, now let's turn our gaze back to the piano bench up there and see if we can square how any of those things possibly relate to the person we see seated before us.
All right, so, and in the midst of all that, too, there's some stuff with Blanchett at the piano with Max, doing this kind of lovely bit of musical tutelage and talking about Bach and saying she's playing part of the well-tempered clavier, and she's saying this could be Schroeder playing for Lucy. It could be Glenn Gould. I don't know. It's kind of a wonderful little thing. I should also say that this movie is directed by Todd Field, if I haven't said it already, who doesn't get very many movies on screen. That's the way to put it. But In the Bedroom and Little Children are his two other movies, both of them, critical successes. So, Irene, I think we're going to have you lead off again. and because also you hold the unique distinction of having watched Tar twice, once I believe in the movie theater. So I don't know, how is the movie sitting with you right now?
I think it's very interesting overall. And I mean, I'm ambivalent about it in ways that we can get into because, I love it. In a way, I absolutely adored watching it because I loved being in its world of Cate Blanchett and cities and classical music and, intimate conversations and all that. And it just pulls you right in. And the second time I felt it again, that it's so beautiful to watch, and the way that the scenes look is beautiful and all that. But I have some reservations about it that maybe got a little bit tempered, or more complicated the second time I saw it. So it's hard to explain that without spoilers, but it's interesting for a man to write he wrote the whole screenplay himself, right? Supposedly. And, it's kind of like playing with issues that are usually, or a kind of character that's usually male. And he's like, let's make her a lesbian instead. And so that's an interesting challenge. And I'm not sure that he pulls it off.
Yeah, we're going to be kind of careful about what we say and what we don't say because we don't want to spoil too much. But I think it doesn't spoil much to say that some of the trouble that Lydia Tár gets into has to do with allegations that she's used her power, her tremendous power, to recruit, for whatever purposes, young female musicians who kind of enter her world. At least one of them leaves her world in a state of shattered mental health. But she's gotten in trouble for other reasons, including the way she talks back to Max in that particular scene. Although I think everything she's saying is pretty much 100% true. But so let's hear from the rest of the panel. Sam, how about you? I know you didn't have much of a relationship with Tár. I'm guessing probably not with Mahler either, even though you're steeped in all kinds of other music.
Yeah, I orchestral music is tough for me just because it's just so hard to get a grasp on. I'm just like digging my way through jazz, so I think I'll get to orchestral at some point in my life. I enjoyed the movie. The pace, I wish the pace was a little bit quicker. But the actual themes that are being explored here, patriarchal power systems, especially under the gaze of from a woman's perspective, because it's kind of in the word, but patriarchal systems are propped up by men. These power systems that allow someone like Lydia Tár to take advantage of women. That's a system developed by men. So to see this director kind of explore this through Cate Blanchett's view, I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed the way they talked about music. I wish that we could talk about all music in that regard, getting that down to the nuance of the emotion, like those little conversations with that older gentleman at the dinner table, even to an extent in the classroom, her talking to her partner. I just love the way that music was discussed here. I think for me, halfway through the film, I just had this moment of eureka, oh my God, she's a bad person. We're watching a movie about a really bad human being who just happens to be really successful. And it's funny, Colin, that you think that bit in the classroom was 100% correct, because that's kind of the story of Lydia. She kind of sums it up ironically, talking about herself being reduced down to these allegations that we brought up. I'm not going to give too much away, but I thought it was tastefully done. I do want to bring up the cinematography and the shots. Absolutely gorgeous. There was a real focus on sound here, how she keeps getting distracted by different sounds and all around, and sometimes they seem kind of mundane, but I think it all ties back to her conducting. But overall, I thought it was a really interesting film.
Yeah, Bill, to Sam's point, it's a remarkable looking film, and I said it reminded me a little bit of Don't Look Now, the Nicholas Roeg horror movie set in Venice. But there's a way in which Berlin is used with all of its kind of shadows and strange little alleyways and odd semi-darkened spaces. It's like a Hopper or De Chirico painting or something. There's just all these kind of ominous shadows being flung about. And you got to love that part of it. But Bill, I'm not even letting you talk about how you felt about the movie.
Well, I agree with you about the aesthetics, you and Irene. I agree with both of you about the aesthetics of it. And one of the things that really struck out to me about the visuals is it really contrasts the beautiful and the ugly, which I think is a reflection of the beauty of her creations and the ugliness of parts of her soul. And we have to talk about Blanchett's performance. It's one of those films where it really is about this one person. Of course there are other characters, but the reason it has her name as its title. It's about her, and Blanchett's performance, I think, really is Oscar worthy. And you hear in that clip you played, and it's such a great clip, it's such a touchstone of the film, you hear the how condescending she is. It's dripping from her voice when she says to Max, "You're not much into Bach." It's like me talking to Sam about U2. It's that same kind of just terrible, awful treatment of a younger person. And yet, as you say, she's right. Such a key point that she makes to him. If you can dismiss based simply on race and gender, they can do that to you as well. And that's such an important part of the cultural moment that we're in, that this film really speaks very well to. Like Irene, I have some ambivalences about it. Mine are mostly about the latter part of the film, like really kind of like the last half hour. And I'm not going to say anything that would spoil it for anyone, but it goes in this direction that I kind of wish they had just ended it before then, not because of length, but really because of the decisions that are made.
Yeah. So, I mean, I should say, go ahead, Irene, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I just have to say that I didn't like that scene very much, the scene that you played, because I felt like it was everything for me that I was resisting in the movie, because I just didn't believe that I loved her performance, but I thought the writing was very, I don't think classical, musicians are going to disparage atonal music because it's atonal, it's just like, oh, who can listen to this music? It's too big. You should listen to Bach instead, which was kind of the takeaway that we got from that. And I think, I don't know, I just felt like, really, is that how she would talk about it? I don't think so. And so there were some of the conversations that I just resisted in terms of how they were talking about Beethoven's Fifth and everything. But, so I just had to say, but because there's something about the sort of exaggeration of distortion that I didn't quite believe about her personality. But I think it's interesting that Sam said she was a bad person, because I think there is that suggestion there. But there's also her. I mean, she is very, 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 very committed to her own work and to music and to what she's doing, and she has that. She played that narcissism so well, and in that scene is a good indication of it. But anyway, I'm just thinking about whether she's, to what is bad and what is the movie trying to say about what is good or bad.
Yeah, I think the narcissism, I think the speeches don't show the narcissism as well as some of the smaller moments, particularly smaller moments with her and her wife, played by Nina Hoss, Sharon, where, there's two exchanges that struck me in particular. One of them was, at a certain point, she's really in a lot of trouble. Lydia Tár's in a lot of trouble. And her wife says, "You should have told me about this sooner." And I can't remember her exact answer, but it was like, well, I didn't know how much trouble I was going to get in. And her wife goes, "No, we're all in trouble now. You don't understand. There's a threat to this whole family. That's why you should have told me." And there's another scene where, because she's upset, she's driving very erratically. And so her wife says, "You've got to slow down. Either that or let me out of the car." And she immediately pulls over and lets her wife out of the car. that was her solution.
Her wife tells her, every relationship in your life, except with your daughter, is transactional.
Yeah.
Every other relationship is transactional.
And the one thing, we decided later, we should have at least considered having Steve Metcalf come on the show. He's not on the nose very often, but because I think he probably prefers other kinds of formats. But he would have had so much interesting stuff to say about this, and I don't know anything close to what Steve knows about this. But I really have worked at this point with a number of conductors pretty closely, and I've worked with smaller ensembles, bringing pieces alive and putting them on stage, and I'm always the most ignorant, dumbest person in the room when I'm working with an orchestra or a smaller kind of chamber type group or something. But I really kind of learned a lot about this world and how the people in it operate. And I thought this was really, in terms of the musical details, very accurate and very steeped. And like every name that's ever mentioned is a real, like Anna Thorsvold's daughter, who you hear about in that speech. That's a real person. That's an Icelandic composer. There's another woman Icelandic composer who wrote the thematic music for this. All the music that isn't either Mahler or Elgar is written by another woman who's an Icelandic composer. But just in terms of performance scores and like all this kind of stuff, the business of it and everything that I saw really rang true in terms of what it's like to try to live in this world. And Sam, you know, I don't know whether there is an analogy in other parts of music, because what a conductor does is so different. You know, it really is in many ways a combination of an act of domination. You absolutely are the lion tamer, and they're the lions. The orchestra's the lions, and you can't let that reality out of your sight. But you have all these fabulously talented, I mean, there's, you know, in a symphony orchestra, there's just no Nickelback, you know, there's no, like, everybody's really good or they wouldn't be there. They're just really, really, really good or they wouldn't be there. And they all have personalities, and some of that's got to come in too. And I don't know how much of that was communicated, Sam, but I thought the movie was doing a good job of sort of saying, okay, how do you do that? How do you be creative but honor the intention of somebody who's been a composer who's been dead for 200 years and somehow or other get your ensemble to do their best work without kind of going off the reservation and becoming, you probably can't even use that term anymore, without just becoming freelancers in a way that's just not cohesive. I don't know. React to my incoherent statement.
Yeah, she was like, it was like she was the mitochondria of the cell. Like, I thought that was so cool. And there was just like one scene, God, I hope I didn't disappoint my bio teacher. Sorry, Miss Williams. There was this one scene where she talks about how the conductor has to be dead center in the stage. Like, it can't be off stage. Like, the conductor is really like the head of the beast and how important that is to her. And what I thought really was communicated well. And I think that there's like a ton of modern examples you could take. And there's one that's like glaringly staring me in the face of who I would compare this cultural moment and this movie. It's kind of Kanye West. It's kind of like very similar, where you have this person, this egomaniac heading the ship, directing, conducting, doing crazy stuff away from the music, and it finally catches up with them. I was like, oh, this is a familiar tale. But I feel like the exploration of her personal narcissism and her musical narcissism and how both of them profited and were a negative towards her, if I'm making sense, I thought that exploration was huge throughout the film. Like, the narcissism actually helps her on stage. You can see the way that she moves, operates, she loves leading. But that narcissism bites her in the back end in her personal life, obviously by taking advantage of people, the way she treats her assistant, the way she treats her partner, the way she treats the other conductors. She's like demeaning and rude, and it's funny to see the nuance in that emotion.
Actually, we're going to wrap up here. I do want to say that one of the sort of many subtexts here is that she is the self-professed disciple of Lenny Bernstein, and she was watching one of his little sort of, you know, omnibus type talks about music at the end of the movie. And that next year, I believe, Bradley Cooper, this sounds like a joke, but it's not. Bradley Cooper is releasing a biopic of Lenny Bernstein, in which I assume he plays Lenny Bernstein, but as a talking raccoon. But anyway, that'll be an interesting bookend to this. And we'll bring this panel back. We'll have the same conversation about Bradley Cooper as Lenny. All right, we got to take a quick break, so we'll have time to make some endorsements. All right, and I want to thank Eugene Amatruda, who has been getting us through this week as our guest technical producer. Jonathan McPants is, as usual, the producer of this and all other Nose episodes. And time to make some recommendations. Bill Yousman, why don't you get us started?
All right, I'm going to stick with the musical theme of today's episode, and I'm going to kind of be a much older and much less cooler Sam Hadelman by endorsing a group called SAULT, and it's spelled SAULT. And they're a very kind of mysterious collective. They've never done any type of media work. They've never done any interviews. They've never given a live show. Some people have made suggestions about who they think is a part of this, but none of that has ever been confirmed. But they've also released 11 albums since 2019. And they're mostly based in Black American musical styles, but very eclectic. There is some orchestral music. There's even some punk influences. A lot of it's very gospel and R&B and funk and house. I think they're fascinating. They just did this thing where they released 5 albums, surprisingly, online, where you could download them for free for only 5 days if you figured out the special password. So they're very mysterious, but their music is terrific. It's SAULT, SAULT.
All right. Irene Papoulis, how about you? What are you going to recommend?
Okay. I'm also in the music, but in a different direction of it, which is I've been reading this book for a long time about Beethoven. It's a biography of Beethoven by Maynard Solomon. And it's so interesting. And I just, it's a kind of book you can dip into once in a, every once in a while, and just kind of like pick up where you left off. And it's sort of apropos of what Sam was saying, or what made me think of when you were talking about what is it, what is a great art, what are the ramifications of being a great artist, psychological ones. And he answers that same question about Beethoven, based on what, his life and what was, and some speculation about his psychology in a way that I find very, very, very readable and interesting. So I recommend that book. And I also have to recommend the latest season of The Crown, because I'm just enjoying it so much. And I know so many people that don't like it or think it's, why do we have to hear about Dodi's father? And I think, no, we have to hear about his father. And it's just so, and the Romanovs, and it all is, the acting is amazing. And I know someone that doesn't like Dominic West's performance, and I can't believe it, because I think he's just like a perfect, speaking of narcissism, he plays a narcissist, a do-gooder narcissist so beautifully. It's just, and I recommend it. Yeah.
I've been watching the series, and he's too handsome to play Prince Charles, and Elizabeth Debicki is too tall to play Diana. She's so 6'3".
She's so tall, but right. But the way
she's great.
Dips her head like Diana.
Yeah, she's got it down. All right, Sam Hadelman, how about a recommendation or two?
I'm going to have fun with these recommendations. I usually just recommend music, but I'm going to try doing something different. I read this fantastic article in The Atlantic called "The Year Virginia Rewrote the Rules of Pop Culture." I didn't realize in 2002, Allen Iverson, Michael Vick, Timbaland, Missy Elliott, and the Clips all came out of Virginia. And we live in such a cool time of regionalization. It was such a fun read. I spent the next hour watching Allen Iverson and Michael Vick highlights and listening to clips. You definitely have to read it. And then I'm going to recommend some places to go this weekend or whenever you're free. Pantry in New Haven. Get the cinnamon roll pancakes, short stack with a side of home fries. It's amazing. Cash only. You'll love it. You'll catch me there reading a book. Don't say hi. And then you can, because I'm reading the book. And there's this fantastic record store in New Haven called Elm City Sounds. That is probably my favorite record store I've ever been to. It's this cute little cozy shop next to a thrift store called Lower Forms. They have every record you could possibly think of. The people who work there are fantastic. And there's like an actual community there of people who you can just talk to about music. It's really fun.
All right. So those are great. And thanks for all of that. And I'm going to recommend, Tar is a very powerful movie, but it's really depressing. So if you wanted a similar kind of experience that was like a lot more fun and you haven't seen Mozart in the Jungle, you should see Mozart in the Jungle, which I believe is available. It's a series that's available, I believe, still on Prime Video. And it's sort of it takes all of the real kind of, anecdotal realism of the symphonic music world that is sketched out so brilliantly but kind of darkly in Tar, and turns it into a lot of fun. And there are all kinds of terrific cameos. They don't just talk about Caroline Shaw. Caroline Shaw suddenly pops up and becomes a character playing herself on the series and stuff. So it's really a lot of fun. And particularly if you just watch Tar, you probably need to watch Mozart in the Jungle as kind of a palate cleanser. All right, so, well, we got to stop there. Thanks to everybody who helped out. Thanks to everybody who listened. And enjoy your Thanksgivings, and we will be back. Well, actually, it's a long story, but we'll be back at some point.
Hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one. Avon, Farmington, yeah.